There is a photograph taken in May 1948, a field somewhere in the Negev. A man in civilian clothes standing next to a machine that looks like it was bolted together from bicycle parts and garden wire. That machine is a Bell 47. It has no weapons. It has no armor. It has a piston engine roughly as powerful as a large motorcycle. And within days of that photograph being taken, the state of Israel will be fighting for its survival on 4 fronts simultaneously, with enemies who outnumber it on the ground, in the air, and at sea. What follows is not the story of a helicopter force. It is the story of something stranger and more interesting than that. It is the story of a country that started with nothing, learned faster than anyone thought possible, took aircraft designed for other purposes and turned them into precision instruments of war, and built, over 7 decades, a rotary-wing arsenal unlike any other on Earth. 19 types, 3 wars that reshaped the region, missions that rewrote the manual on what helicopters can do. This is every helicopter Israel ever flew. Chapter 1. Rotors in the desert, learning to fly while fighting to survive. Israel's operational experience with rotary-wing aircraft begins in 1951. Not with gunships, not with assault transports, with a machine so small and so fragile that it barely qualifies as military equipment. The Bell 47 is the world's first helicopter certified for civilian use. Bubble canopy, exposed tail boom, a 2-blade rotor driven by a piston engine producing around 178 horsepower. Maximum speed, 169 kilometers per hour. Payload, almost nothing. In Korea, the Americans used it for medical evacuation. In Israel, it is used for liaison, observation, and as the IAF's first rotary-wing trainer, teaching a generation of pilots what it means to fly something that has no wings. Flying alongside it is the Hiller UH-12, a machine so similar in concept that the two are essentially competitors for the same jobs. The Hiller uses a different rotor control system, a servo rotor design that Arthur Young considered innovative enough to patent. In Israel, it is called simply the Hiller 360 after its commercial designation. Between these 2 tiny machines, the IAF learns the fundamentals of low-altitude navigation in contested terrain, of hovering, of the weight calculations that will later save the lives of soldiers inserted behind enemy lines. Neither aircraft carries a weapon. Neither needs to. Their contribution is entirely in what they teach. But the 1956 Suez Campaign changes the calculation permanently. Israel watches Britain and France use helicopters for assault landings along the canal. The IAF has nothing capable of that. The first 2 Sikorsky S-55 Chickasaw helicopters arrive in Israel just weeks before Operation Kadesh, but they are not declared operational in time to participate. 6 more are ordered in 1958. The S-55 is a step change, a Wright R1300 Cyclone radial engine producing 700 horsepower, a cargo cabin capable of carrying 10 passengers, a real transport in a category Israel has never had before. The problem is the engine. Israel's climate, desert heat combined with coastal humidity, degrades its performance progressively. The S-55 is never quite able to do what the IAF needs it to do in the conditions it actually operates in. It is retired in 1963, replaced by something with twice the power and a fraction of the mechanical temperament, while France delivers something different entirely. The Aerospatiale SE-3130 Alouette II arrives in the early 1960s as Israel's first turbine-powered helicopter. The Artust 2 turboshaft engine produces 360 shaft horsepower, a number that sounds modest, until you consider how much less it weighs than the piston alternatives, and how much more reliably it performs at altitude and in heat. The Alouette II is unarmed in Israeli service, used for reconnaissance, liaison, and pilot training. But the lesson it teaches is fundamental. Turbine power is not a luxury. In the Middle East, it is a survival requirement. 15 Alouette IIs serve the IAF, each one accelerating the shift toward a force built on jet propulsion rather than piston temperament. The turbine advantage made the next choice obvious. The Sikorsky S-58 Choctaw arrives in Israel on February 13, 1958, when the first pair lands and is assigned to the Rolling Sword Squadron, the IAF's single helicopter unit at the time. By 1962, an additional 24 S-58s, originally earmarked for the West German Air Force, have been covertly rerouted to Israel, doubling the fleet overnight. The S-58 is a serious machine, a Wright R-1820 radial engine producing 1,525 horsepower, a combat radius exceeding 180 kilometers, and a cargo bay capable of carrying 18 combat soldiers with full equipment. At the outbreak of the Six-Day War on June 5, 1967, the Rolling Sword Squadron has 28 airworthy S-58s. They begin the war evacuating pilots downed during Operation Moked, the opening strike on Arab airfields. By the night of June 5th to 6th, they are doing something far more ambitious, airlifting 600 IDF soldiers behind Egyptian lines in the central Sinai, where Israeli armor has met resistance fierce enough to stall the advance. The inserted force destroys an Egyptian artillery position and directly accelerates the collapse of the Egyptian front. During the final phase of the war, on June 9th and 10th, S-58s conduct 3 separate lifts, inserting Israeli paratroopers behind Syrian lines on the Golan Heights, attacking retreating Syrian forces from the rear. The S-58 turns the Golan operation from a frontal assault into a pincer movement. It retires from IAF service in the early 1970s, having participated in 2 wars, but its replacement in the heavy category will serve for more than half a century. Chapter 2. The French Connection, Secrets, Super Frelons, and a Radar in the Desert. Before the American supply relationship becomes permanent, France is Israel's primary partner, and one of the most consequential machines France delivers is the Aerospatiale SA-321K Super Frelon, designated Tzir-A, the Hebrew word for wasp. The Super Frelon is the largest helicopter ever built in Western Europe at the time of its introduction. 3 turboshaft engines producing a combined 4,500 shaft horsepower. A boat-shaped hull designed for amphibious operations. A payload capacity that dwarfs anything Israel has previously operated. 5 initial aircraft arrive in the early 1960s, and more follow. The Super Frelon can reach targets the S-58 cannot. It can operate from water. It can carry equipment the CH-53 has not yet arrived to carry. In 1969, during the War of Attrition, 2 Super Frelons and a force of commandos fly one of the most audacious helicopter missions of the Cold War. They land inside Egypt, in the dark, and extract a Soviet P-12 spoon rest radar system intact. The radar is loaded onto the helicopter, flown back to Israel, and handed to Israeli and American intelligence for technical analysis. The Soviets are operating air defense equipment in an active theater and have just had a critical piece of it stolen by a helicopter crew. Operation Rooster 53 rewrites what people think helicopters are capable of. There is, however, a problem. Israel's desert heat degrades the Super Frelon's performance substantially below what the aircraft delivers in France's temperate climate. The IAF attempts to re-engine several airframes with American General Electric T-58 turboshaft units to restore power margins, with limited success. The type is eventually supplanted by the far more capable CH-53, and several of the Israeli Super Frelons are re-exported to Argentina. But the operational doctrine the type establishes, deep penetration, precise extraction, night operations in hostile airspace, survives and defines Israeli helicopter thinking for the next 5 decades. The door it opened led somewhere much heavier. The Sikorsky CH-53D, designated Yas'ur, the Hebrew word for petrel, arrives on October 2, 1969. The first aircraft is delivered directly into a war. Israel is fighting Egypt in the War of Attrition, a grinding campaign of artillery and airstrikes along the Suez Canal, and the Yas'ur is immediately operational. It is the largest helicopter Israel has ever flown. Twin General Electric T-64 turboshaft engines, 9,245 shaft horsepower combined, a cargo bay 9.1 meters long and 2.3 meters wide, capable of carrying 35 fully equipped combat soldiers or 8 tons of cargo on an external sling. Nothing in the IAF inventory approaches it. Over the decades that follow, the Yas'ur becomes the backbone of every complex IAF helicopter operation. In the 1982 Lebanon War, Yas'ur crews run continuous medical airlifts from the front to Rambam Hospital in Haifa, beginning on the second day of fighting. Pilots and mechanics get out of the cockpit to personally load wounded soldiers when medical teams are overwhelmed. The helicopter is flying so many missions that the concept of a crew rest cycle effectively ceases to exist. On May 10, 1977, a Yas'ur crashes during a divisional exercise in the Jordan Valley. All 54 men aboard are killed, including 10 aircrew. It is the worst single aviation disaster in Israeli military history. The event is designated Asan Nun Dalet in Hebrew, the disaster of the 54, and it shapes safety doctrine for a generation. Then, on the night of February 4, 1997, 2 Yas'ur helicopters carrying soldiers to Lebanon collide over the village of She'ar Yashuv in northern Israel. All 73 men aboard both aircraft are killed, every soldier, every crewman. The IAF grounds the fleet, convenes an inquiry, and rebuilds its formation flying doctrine from the ground up. The Yas'ur itself is rebuilt multiple times. The $75 million Yas'ur 2000 program, begun in the early 1980s, replaces the cockpit and avionics entirely, adding Israeli-developed FLIR, digital navigation, and new communications architecture. The Yas'ur 2025 program installs over 20 new electronic systems, including, for the first time on any IAF helicopter, an active missile defense system. A 1960s airframe is turned into a modern, survivable asset through 3 decades of continuous domestic engineering. On October 7, 2023, a Yas'ur is shot down by a Hamas Cornet anti-tank missile during the opening hours of the Gaza war. It is the first CH-53 lost to enemy fire since 2006. The remaining fleet, already decades past its original retirement date, flies mass casualty evacuation missions at altitudes between 15 and 60 meters, below the worst of the anti-aircraft threat, but inside the effective range of small arms. Pilots describe flying over fields where Hamas motorcycles are still moving beneath them while they are lifting casualties. The helicopter that first arrived when Israel was fighting along the Suez Canal is still flying combat missions in 2023. That is 54 years of continuous operational service. Its replacement is already in production. Chapter 3. Utility and blood. The Hueys, the Heron, and the Owl. Not every helicopter that saves lives fires a weapon. And not every machine in the IAF inventory makes the headlines. Some of them simply carry the soldiers, fly the routes nobody glamorizes, and keep the force operational when everything else is stretched to the limit. The Bell UH-1 Iroquois, the famous Huey, enters IAF service during the 1960s. It is the helicopter the whole world associates with Vietnam, a turbine-powered medium utility type with a 1,100 shaft horsepower Lycoming T-53 engine, a combat radius of around 200 kilometers, and a cabin capable of carrying 11 soldiers or 6 stretchers. In Israeli service, it works the unglamorous middle ground: troop insertion, medical evacuation, liaison, resupply. The Huey teaches Israeli commanders what a standardized assault transport can do when it operates in quantity. It is never glamorous. It is always present. The Bell 212 follows. Designated Anafa, the Hebrew word for heron, the 212 is a twin-engine evolution of the Huey design. A Pratt & Whitney PT6T3 turbo shaft package producing 1,250 shaft horsepower from 2 turbines driving a single rotor through a combining gearbox. If one engine fails, the other keeps flying. In the Lebanese mountains, along the northern border, across the Sinai and back, that redundancy matters. IAF Bell 212. Anafa helicopters fly combat missions in Lebanon for over 2 decades, developing the night low-level infiltration techniques that later become IAF standard doctrine. They insert special operations forces into positions no fixed-wing aircraft can reach, extract casualties from clearings too small for the Yas'ur, and keep the border operations running through the 1970s and 1980s. The Anafa is the everyday machine of Israeli helicopter warfare. Something smaller is building alongside it. The Bell 206 Siphon, the Hebrew name translating roughly as Avoset, enters IAF service in 1973 and becomes the primary helicopter trainer from May 1976 onward. Every IAF helicopter pilot since that date has flown the Siphon first. It is a light turbine single, a 317 shaft horsepower Allison 250 engine, maximum speed around 220 kilometers per hour. No weapons capacity in the training role. Its contribution is entirely human. It shapes the instrument scan, the power management habits, and the low-altitude instincts of every pilot who later flies the Black Hawk, the Apache, or the Yas'ur. During the 1991 Gulf War, when Iraqi Scud missiles begin landing in Israel, Siphons are scrambled after each impact to locate the point of strike and assess damage. A training helicopter doing battle damage assessment in a live missile campaign. That is the kind of operational flexibility that the IAF expects from every airframe it flies, regardless of what it was designed for. Sitting between the Siphon and the larger combat types is the Bell OH-58 Kiowa. Approximately 18 airframes enter IAF service in the early 1970s, replacing the aging Alouette IIs in the light scout and observation role. The OH-58 in Israeli service is produced in Italy specifically for the IAF and can be armed with cannon pods and rocket pods when the mission requires it. Its primary job is to bridge the training gap, preparing pilots for the demands of the UH-60 and the AH-64, while providing a low-signature platform capable of operating where deploying a Cobra or an Apache would represent disproportionate risk and cost. 18 active airframes are still listed in the IAF inventory, well into the 2000s. A modest number, doing a job that no other aircraft in the fleet can fill as cheaply. And then the medium category gets a machine worthy of the name. The Sikorsky UH-60 Black Hawk, designated Gunship, the Hebrew word for owl, arrives in August 1994. The first 10 aircraft come as a direct gift from the American government, manufactured between 1977 and 1979, retired from U.S. Army service 3 weeks before their delivery to Israel, and transported in the cargo bays of 2 C-5 Galaxy transports. In the months that follow, the IAF modifies them comprehensively. Communication systems rebuilt to Israeli specifications, electronic warfare suites replaced, navigation equipment upgraded. In April 1996, during Operation Grapes of Wrath against Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, the Gunship flies its first combat missions, performing assault transport, logistics, rescue, and evacuation in conditions that ground other platforms. In 1999, the IAF upgrades its Black Hawks to the Gunship 2 standard. In-flight refueling probes are fitted, allowing missions of a range the original airframe never contemplated. Modernized electronic countermeasures are installed, night vision systems, enhanced rescue equipment. A standard utility helicopter becomes a special operations-capable platform through Israeli engineering applied to an American airframe, a pattern the IAF has executed without exception since the 1960s. A second purchase order for 24 additional aircraft arrives in 2000. By August 2002, a second Gunship squadron opens. The total fleet eventually reaches approximately 50 airframes across the UH-60A and UH-60L variants. In March 2000, 3 Gunship helicopters transport Pope John Paul II during his visit to Israel, one carrying the Pope, one his medical team, and one on constant standby. The most unlikely operational tasking in the type's history. The machine that ferried paratroopers into Lebanon ferried a pope across the Holy Land 2 years later. In 2015, the armed variant arrives. Elbit Systems is contracted to transform a portion of the UH-60L fleet into the AH-60L configuration. Wing-mounted pylons are fitted. The weapons options include Rafael Spike LR and ER anti-tank missiles, 70mm guided and unguided rockets, and a 20mm GIITM 621 cannon mounted beneath the fuselage. A medium-lift transport becomes a limited attack platform without replacing the airframe. The logic is purely Israeli. The airframe exists, the mission exists. Find the engineering path that connects them. The AH-60L is not an Apache. It does not claim to be. But it can prosecute targets the Apache is not available to reach, and it costs a fraction of the dedicated attack platform to operate per flight hour. Chapter 4. The Viper and the Defender, Israel's First Strike Machines. The Yom Kippur War of October 1973 is the event that forces a decision. Egypt and Syria attack on a religious holiday, with coordinated armor columns, Soviet-supplied missiles, and the kind of operational surprise that exposes every gap in Israeli preparedness. Israeli armor takes catastrophic losses to anti-tank weapons. The IAF loses dozens of aircraft to mobile surface-to-air missiles it has no effective counter for. And the lesson that emerges is stark. The ground forces need dedicated helicopter fire support, and they need it now. By 1975, the first Bell AH-1G Cobras arrive in Israel. 6 aircraft purchased from U.S. Army surplus, becoming the IAF's first true attack helicopters. The Cobra is a purpose-built gunship, a single 1,400 shaft horsepower Lycoming T-53 turboshaft, maximum speed 277 kilometers per hour, a tandem cockpit just under 1 meter wide, designed specifically to minimize the frontal profile an enemy gunner sees. It is designated Zephyr, the Hebrew word for viper. The first attack helicopter squadron formally stands up on December 1st, 1977, and within 2 years, the Zephyr is already at war. On May 9, 1979, 2 IAF Cobras crossed the Israeli-Lebanese border at dusk, flying low over the Mediterranean to avoid detection, and fire 4 Orev missiles into a militant structure near Tyre. Both passes score direct hits. The attack helicopter has arrived on the Israeli northern front, and it is not leaving for 34 years. The aircraft is upgraded to the AH-1Q standard, adding BGM-71 TOW anti-tank missiles to the weapons suite. Then a U.S. arms embargo temporarily halts further purchases, and Israel is forced to find an alternative. The alternative is the McDonnell Douglas MD-500 Defender, designated Lahatut, a Hebrew word meaning trick. Around 30 Defenders arrive in late 1979, with a squadron formally established in April 1980. The Lahatut is derived from the OH-6A Cayuse reconnaissance helicopter, small and agile with a 420-shaft horsepower Allison 250 engine. In Israeli configuration, it carries a turret-mounted electro-optical sight and 4 TOW missiles, 2 on each side of the fuselage, in a weapons fit developed specifically for close-terrain fighting. The Defender's first operational sortie comes just 3 months after the squadron stands up, in July 1980, when 2 Lahatuat attack a terrorist installation in southern Lebanon. By June 1982, during Operation Peace for Galilee, they are doing something considerably more complex. Lahatut crews fly suppression missions against Syrian air defense radar stations in the Bekaa Valley on June 9, 1982, the same day the IAF destroys 29 of 30 Syrian SAM batteries in one of the most lopsided air battles in modern military history. The Defenders fly below radar coverage to destroy the ground-based systems that would have detected incoming IAF fighter bombers. They are not fast enough to survive a direct engagement, so they fly where speed does not matter, on the deck, in the valleys, below the threat. One Lahatut is lost when a Syrian tank spots a pair and fires on them, shrapnel destroying the tail rotor. The crew does not survive. 6 more Defenders are purchased in 1984. The type flies until 1995. Meanwhile, 24 new Cobras arrive between 1983 and 1985 as the arms embargo lifts, enabling the creation of a second Cobra squadron, the Fighting Family Squadron, on June 1, 1985. The Cobra fleet engages Syrian armor during the 1982 war, destroying dozens of armored vehicles, including T-72 main battle tanks, which the TOW missile defeats despite the tank's reputation for near invulnerability against earlier weapons. Zephyr crews cling to the terrain, use nap-of-the-earth flight profiles developed over years of Lebanese operations, and fire from positions where the tanks can barely elevate their main guns to respond. In August 1996, 14 surplus U.S. Army AH-1F Cobras arrive in Israel, expanding the fleet and providing dedicated training airframes. In its final Zephyr D and E configuration, the Cobra carries the Machtzelet, an Israeli version of Rafael's Spike missile with an imaging infrared seeker. Fire and forget. The crew launches the missile, breaks off the attack, and lets the seeker guide itself to the target. A 1960s airframe carrying a weapon that did not exist when it was designed, on a threat that did not exist when it was acquired. The Cobra's last frontline squadron stands down in the summer of 2013. 38 years of continuous IAF service. The final 33 airframes are not replaced by a newer attack helicopter. They are replaced by armed, unmanned aerial vehicles, Israel is the only country in the world to formally retire a manned attack helicopter in favor of armed drones as its primary close air support platform. In late 2014, 16 of the withdrawn Cobras transfer to the Royal Jordanian Air Force. The Viper departs. Chapter 5. The Apex, Apache, Panther, and the weight of October 7th. In 1983, Hughes Aircraft sends an CH-53 Apache prototype to Israel for combat evaluation. It is still a HUSMA developmental aircraft. 3 IAF pilots, including the commander of the Cobra Squadron, accumulate 50 flight hours on the prototype over 1 month. Their report, delivered to the IAF commander in January 1989, is unambiguous. This is the machine. A deal is signed for 18 CH-53 Apaches. The first 2 arrive in Israel on the night of September 12, 1990, in the cargo bay of an El Al Boeing 747. They are assembled in 11 hours, half the time specified by the manufacturer, to be ready for the following morning's welcoming ceremony. The type is designated Petan, the Hebrew word for cobra, the same name the IAF gave the AH-1, as if acknowledging what the Apache is and what it replaces. The AH-64A carries 2 General Electric T700 turboshaft engines, producing 3,446 shaft horsepower combined. A 30mm M230 chain gun, carrying up to 1,200 rounds. 16 AGM-114 Hellfire missiles, or 76 Hydra 70 rockets, or a combination of both. A maximum speed of 293 kilometers per hour, and a suite of night vision and targeting systems that in 1990 represents the most capable attack helicopter ever exported from the United States. On the night of September 12, 1993, exactly 3 years to the day from the first delivery, 4 American C-5 Galaxies land at an IAF base at 2-hour intervals, each carrying 6 additional Apaches, a gift from the U.S. government. A second Apache squadron stands up. By 2000, Israel operates 42 AH-64As. The Apache participates in Operation Accountability in 1993, Operation Grapes of Wrath in 1996, and the Al-Aqsa Intifada throughout the early 2000s, where its precision strike capability is used for targeted killings of senior Hamas and Hezbollah figures in ways that no other platform can replicate with acceptable levels of collateral risk. Squadron 113, the Hornet Squadron, carries out the 1992 helicopter-borne killing of Hezbollah leader Abbas Musawi. The Apache is not just a tank killer, it is a surgical instrument. On May 24, 2001, an IAF AH-64A makes the first confirmed air-to-air kill in the Apache's entire global service history. A civilian Cessna 152 enters Israeli airspace from Lebanon, repeatedly ignores air traffic control instructions, and is destroyed by an Apache missile. The type designed to kill tanks kills a light aircraft instead. The kill is recorded. On February 10, 2018, an Iranian UAV enters Israeli airspace from Syria. An Apache destroys it with a missile. The second air-to-air kill in Israeli Apache service, and the first against an Iranian unmanned system. Then the longbow arrives. The AH-64D, designated Saraf, the Hebrew for fiery serpent, enters IAF service in April 2005 after years of negotiation over American reluctance to share the aircraft's source code. The longbow designation refers to the AN/APG 78mm wave radar mounted above the main rotor, capable of detecting and tracking up to 256 targets simultaneously and prioritizing the 16 most dangerous. The radar sees through smoke, dust, and bad weather, It fires while hidden behind terrain. It is a fundamentally different weapon system from the CH-54A, not in airframe, but in lethality. The Israeli Saraf is different again from the American D model. The ELTA communications suite replaces the American equivalent. The Elbit mission management system is installed. The Rafael combat net system. The Alizra self-protection suite. IAF Apaches are also cleared to carry Rafael Spike anti-tank missiles instead of the Hellfire, a weapon substitution that reflects a deliberate policy. Israeli munitions on Israeli aircraft operating an Israeli-developed doctrine, using an American airframe as the foundation rather than the definition. By 2013, the entire AH-64A fleet has been upgraded to the AH-64AI standard, near equivalent to the D-model longbow, through a comprehensive avionics overhaul that extends combat capability without replacing airframes. Then, October 7, 2023. At the moment Hamas launches its assault, only 4 Apache helicopters are on standby across the entire country. 2 on short standby in the north, 2 on long standby, also in the north, pointed toward the Lebanese border where doctrine says the threat is. None are positioned for Gaza. The IAF has a few dozen helicopters total, down from over 100 at the peak of the force. Budget pressure, the expansion of armed drone capability, the assumption that UAVs had absorbed the close air support mission. All of it valid. None of it adequate on October 7th. The Apache commanders who speak afterward are explicit. They want a 3rd Apache squadron. They want 40 additional AH-64E aircraft, the latest variant. They want the force rebuilt. The discussions with the Pentagon begin. The process continues. In a quieter corner of the fleet, a different machine has been doing different work. The Eurocopter AS-565 Panther, a twin-engine medium helicopter derived from the Aerospatiale SA-365 Dauphin, enters Israeli service around 1985. Between 5 and 7 airframes, operated not by the IAF's combat squadrons, but by the Israeli Navy, using IAF infrastructure for search and rescue along the Mediterranean and Red Sea coastlines. The Panther carries a GIATM-621 20mm cannon, 2.75-inch rocket pods, AS-15TT anti-ship missiles, HOT anti-tank missiles, and Mark 46 torpedoes. A search and rescue helicopter that can sink ships if necessary. Very few air arms in the world fly a platform that straddles those 2 missions simultaneously. On December 30th, 2021, a Panther crashes off the coast of Haifa during a nighttime exercise, killing 2 IAF officers. It is a reminder of a reality that runs through every chapter of this story. The machines are pushed hard. The missions never stop, and the cost is borne by the crews who fly them. Chapter 6. Built to Last, the Next Generation and What It Replaces. Israel's relationship with the CH-53 has now lasted more than 5 decades. The airframe arrived in 1969 and is still flying combat missions in 2024. Every component has been replaced at least once. The avionics bear no resemblance to what Sikorsky installed in Connecticut in the 1960s. The pilots who fly it today were born after some of the aircraft's most famous missions, and the helicopter that is coming to replace it is categorically, fundamentally different. In February 2021, Israel selects the Sikorsky CH-53K King Stallion over the Boeing CH-47F Chinook. The decision is driven by one number above all others: 16,300 kilograms of payload over 170 kilometers, nearly 3 times the legacy Yas'ur's capacity. A December 2022 letter of agreement confirms the purchase of 12 aircraft at approximately $2 billion, drawn from American military assistance funding. The CH-53K is designated Per, the Hebrew word for wild ass, a name that carries a specific connotation in Israeli military culture. Something untamable, something with a strength that cannot be fully controlled. 3 General Electric T408 turboshaft engines, fly-by-wire digital flight controls, the first Israeli heavy-lift helicopter to use them. A cockpit built for degraded visual environments, the brown-out conditions of desert landings, and the urban smoke of modern warfare. Sikorsky builds a separate production line exclusively for Israel's 12 aircraft, modifying each one from the standard U.S. Marine Corps configuration before delivery, integrating IAF-specified avionics, navigation systems, and electronic warfare suites. First deliveries are expected in 2028. The pattern holds: American airframe, Israeli brain, and the Yas'ur flies until then, because it has to. In 2024, Elbit Systems receives a $55 million contract from the Israeli Ministry of Defense to upgrade the protection systems on both the Black Hawk and the Apache fleets. Advanced Directed Infrared Countermeasure Systems, DIRM in the abbreviation, are integrated to defeat the heat-seeking missiles that have proliferated across the region in the hands of Hezbollah, Hamas, and Iranian-backed proxies. The survivability problem that killed the first Yas'ur on October 7, 2023, is not ignored. It is engineered away, one system at a time, in the same incremental, relentless way that Israel has been engineering its way out of impossible situations since 1948. The CH-53 Seahawk, the naval variant of the Black Hawk family, is on order for the Israeli Navy in anti-surface warfare configuration. 8 airframes. A new maritime dimension for a force that has always been oriented toward the land border. And somewhere in the development programs that are not discussed publicly, there are decisions being made right now about what replaces the Apache, about what the AH-60L's successor looks like, about how much of the next generation of rotary-wing combat capability will be manned, and how much will not. From a Bell 47 with a piston engine and no weapons to an AH-64D Saraf, carrying Spike missiles guided by Israeli software on an American airframe, this force traveled in 76 years, a distance that most air arms do not cover in a century. 19 types, every one of them modified. Every one of them pushed harder than the original designers specified. Some of them kept flying decades past their planned retirement dates because the mission did not stop, and the replacement was not ready, and the crews made it work anyway. The Bell 47 and the Hiller 360 taught Israel how to fly. The S-55 and the S-58 taught Israel how to move soldiers. The Alouette II and the Super Frelon taught Israel what turbine power could do, and what doctrine built around reach and precision looked like. The CH-53 Yas'ur taught Israel how to sustain operations over 54 years of continuous warfare, and how to rebuild a machine that history has not yet finished with. The AH-1 Cobra and the MD-500 Defender taught Israel how to kill tanks from a helicopter, and how to apply that capability with the surgical precision that the terrain and the politics of Lebanon demanded. The UH-1 and the Bell 212 and the Bell 206 and the OH-58 Kiowa taught Israel that the unglamorous machines, the trainers, the transports, the utility types, are not secondary to the story. They are the infrastructure on which every strike mission, every rescue, every insertion behind enemy lines is built. The Black Hawk taught Israel that a utility helicopter, properly engineered, can become a special operations platform. The Apache taught Israel what it means to carry the most lethal attack helicopter in the world and still find it insufficient on the day that matters most. The Panther taught Israel that maritime search and rescue and anti-ship warfare are not separate disciplines. They are the same mission, flown by the same crew, depending on what the sea requires that day. And the CH-53 Yas'ur, still being assembled in Connecticut with Israeli systems not yet installed, carries the combined weight of everything that came before it. Every lesson from every platform. Every pilot who learned something from an aircraft that was not quite right for the job, adapted and made it work anyway. That is the Israeli Air Force helicopter story. Not a story of perfection, a story of relentless adaptation, of taking what exists, making it better than anyone thought possible, and flying it until something better arrives. And when nothing better arrives, flying it longer. The pair lands in Israel in 2028. The story does not end there. It never has.